Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Braden.
I'm Tommy, and if the English language was a training plan, it would be a WOD.
Oh, interesting. I was excited for the English language one.
Yeah, I feel like I did. We have talked about this before.
Yeah. Well, we knew it was going to
Not
come.
specifically, but it came up.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Okay. So, in what way? Can you expand on that?
There's no rules. You literally
Oh,
just do whatever you want.
nice.
Like there is no calculated training plan behind a WOD. Somebody
Yeah.
decided, what are we doing for this workout of the day? I'm just writing this on a whiteboard and off we go. And sometimes I feel like the English language, its quote unquote rules were just made up as it went along.
I think maybe they're like less rules and more patterns. You know, like we say the stuff that we want to say. These are things that we notice happen most of the time, not always. So, keep that in mind, I guess.
There's just so many exceptions to the
Yeah.
rules. Like I don't even know if the English language can say it has rules because it doesn't follow them very well. There's so many. Like we could be here for decades using examples from the English language in terms of like how many different ways you can pluralize a word,
Mm.
or things like that. Like there's just so many exceptions to the rules and anomalies.
Yeah,
It's chaos.
I don't think I've ever learned a rule that didn't have an exception in English. So then it's like, why even don't even call them rules then?
So to me, sometimes like when you hear things with the English language, I feel like somebody just made that up.
Hmm.
Like it didn't follow a set of rules or guidelines from start to finish. It's just someone was like, we're doing it this way. And I have no reason as to why, but this is what's happening. And I feel like sometimes workouts of the day, or the WOD as it's called, kind of has the same element of, I didn't really carefully plan this. You're just coming in for an hour and this is what we're doing. And I
Hmm.
think it will make you tired.
Hmm.
So we're good to go.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, like English language, the whatever would make it easier to learn is thrown aside if it gets in the way of things sounding nice. You know,
Well, that's an interesting take.
like, well, we talked a little while ago. This is the only example I can think of off the top of my head, where like he and she are pronouns that are equivalent. Him and her are pronouns that are equivalent, but her has a possessive component and him does not. So where you would say hers, you would say his, but in some of those situations, you can say her instead,
Yeah, that's fair.
because it sounds weird. Like you can say his heart beats or her heart beats, but you would never say hers hearts beats.
Or him heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, like to me, it doesn't make sense. And I mean, the classic example I always think of is the number of ways you pluralize things.
Hmm.
So a word like bottles, you just throw an S on the end.
Hmm.
And then you see a word like box, but now you have to put an ES on the end to make it
Hmm.
plural. And then you see a word like ox, and all of a sudden it's oxen with an EN.
Hmm.
And then you have goose, which becomes geese. And then you have moose, which is moose.
Hmm.
Like, so even in scenarios where you're like, oh, maybe there's a pattern here that would, like, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
can't pluralize goose the same way you would pluralize moose.
Yeah.
And that's to the point where I'm just like, man, how does anybody learn this language?
Yeah. I do like joking like that though. Like instead of saying moose moose, you would say moose meese.
Or
Or instead of
mooses.
mooses, yeah. Or instead of saying like so mouse and mice,
There's
or you can
another example.
grouse and grice,
Great.
you
Yeah.
could say.
But you
Um,
can see now why the language could get like so messed up
oh, it's impossible to learn.
because of all those different rules. And like I said, that's how I feel like from a training perspective, there's calculated to some extent things that like there's guidelines you're following, there's rules you have in place, there's like an overall plan or thought process that then you're bringing into that daily session,
Mhm.
as where the WOD is just literally something somebody wrote on a whiteboard 5 minutes before the people showed up to work out. And here it is. There's no rules. There's no rhyme or reason. There was no thought about, is this going to work? Is it not going to work? It's just, it's there and we do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I
Yeah.
feel like the English language is the same way. It's just there and we speak it. But
hmm
there's really no good reason as to why we're saying certain things
Yeah.
in a certain way.
It's the way things are, and it works well enough for now.
I guess so.
hmm
But yeah, it's just, I find them both to be very messy.
Yep. They're messy. They're both interesting at the very least, and tiring a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yes. Tiring is a good way to describe both of those things. Different types of tired,
hmm
but tired nonetheless.
hmm There, well, one thing, I guess, aside from the inherent difficulty in the language that might prevent somebody from learning said language could be some kind of a mental barrier that could also prevent somebody from completing a WOD or any workout that has more thought put into it.
A more carefully calculated plan.
Yeah, there you go.
That's very true.
hmm
I wasn't sure how you're going to try to transition that.
I think that was one of the smoother ones.
It was good. I liked it. So you can pat yourself on the back for that one. But yeah, talking a little bit about mental barriers and how do we, overcome those mental barriers with either A, as coaches, or B, with the athletes that we're working with and what they might be struggling with.
Well, yeah, because I mean, obviously, we both work with or have worked with at least a variety of athletes with
Yeah,
in a
team
variety of
sport, individual sports,
Yep, a variety of
competitive
levels,
athletes. Yeah, all kinds of
situations, contexts, and so in each situation, there's different kinds of mental barriers. I think, and then we've also been athletes as well in a variety of sports. So there's different mental barriers that way as well, which I thought would be a good way to start the conversation, like us talking about our experience with having mental barriers, or there's a lot of different ways you could phrase it, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I don't know what we're not sports psychologists, obviously, as people probably would have known. So we're not, as we've mentioned, we're not experts in anything, but we're certainly not experts in sports psychology. So I don't know what the official sports psych term would be, for, a mental barrier or something that's preventing you from performing a skill or something at your best level. But yeah, I think you're right that every athlete or every person who's competing in something, there's maybe something that makes them more anxious or nervous, or they have a hard time completing it with the success that maybe they do other things in their sport. So yeah, I don't know what sort of stuff you've dealt with, like in powerlifting. Is it a certain lift that's maybe the most nerve-wracking, or kind of like some people can figure out 2 of the 3 lifts and the one they just can't figure out? Is it a component within one of the lifts? Maybe there's something else I'm not thinking of.
Well, yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of different situations, contexts. Like some people will be, well, we talked in the competition prep episode that some people are rock solid on game day and some people are a mess on game day. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to their mindset towards competition. And so that's one big example in that on competition day, some people just fall apart and there's a huge mental barrier that is never present in training that all of a sudden comes into play. I think you're right. Most people, there is a specific lift. But even with that, like some people are really good typically at squatting and benching. Those are their 2 lifts because short femurs mean short humeruses. humeri or whatever. There's another one.
Who knows?
So then those two lifts tend to go together as being pretty good between the same person most of the time. So then they'll struggle with deadlifts. And for some people, I think in that situation, that takes the pressure off deadlifts. So deadlifts are really easy and they feel like nothing, no issues with that at all. But then some people get really, really frustrated with deadlifts. And then every time they have to do a heavy deadlift or like an important set, there's all this anxiety around it because it never goes well or whatever their perception is, so there's different situations like that. And then some people also, I feel like, base a lot of their lifting identity around the lift that they're best at. So then there's, potentially a lot of comfort there, a lot of confidence, or there's potentially a lot of anxiety around that going poorly. So yeah, there's a lot of different situations with powerlifting.
Yeah, like if there's the pressure, if you're like a squat person or a deadlifter, then you better bring your A game for that particular lift. I think you sometimes see a little bit of the same thing in track and field when people compete in multiple events. So maybe somebody, does the 1 and the 200, for example, but they care a lot more about one or the other event. And so that would bring possibly some of the same things that you're talking about. Or maybe somebody is strong in certain aspects of a race and not others. So maybe, someone who's, very fast but doesn't have the capacity, gets nervous about the finishing part of a race, where fatigue might play a role. Someone who's, a fearless runner, maybe isn't that great out of the blocks, gets really nervous with the calls and the set position, and then having to react to the gun because they're not comfortable with the blocks. So I guess you could see a little bit of the same thing. And then in a training environment, some people like to move fast. Some people like to lift heavy. Some people like to do exhaustive things. Other people don't. So I'm sure there's all sorts of different aspects in training where people will get a mental block or feel more anxious about conditioning or a heavy lift or testing in the weight room or something like that. I think there's a lot of places that you can potentially run into some of those mental barriers where someone feels like it's impossible to overcome, a certain conditioning test or drill that you're doing in training, or a certain heavy lift or something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting that I was really curious to see how this conversation went, because I don't know. I feel like a lot of people will acknowledge the mental barriers as like a significant thing in lifting. And I know like powerlifting as a general community recognizes like the anxiety around heavy lifts and things like that. But I've never heard of like that kind of mental block or mental barrier with regards to sprinting or any like track and field event. But just like any other sport we were talking before, it makes 100% sense that it would be there.
Yeah, and in the longer events, it could be, again, I'm not an expert on the endurance or the distance side, but it could be somebody's not super comfortable to make a move. For example, like in a 1K, like, oh, the pace feels a little slow. Should I take charge and move to the front and pick up the pace? Some people might really struggle with, is that the right move? Is it the wrong move? I don't know. Like like you said, every sport is going to have different things that could come in as like a mental sticking point. Could be a free throw in basketball. Could be, place kicking in football or rugby, right? All the pressure's on you to deliver in that one kick, and, catching a ball in football. There's a lot of different things in various sports that could be that mental barrier or that skill or action that people maybe overthink or have a really tough time overcoming and being confident in themselves to do it to the best of their ability.
Yeah, for sure. So in sprinting or various sports or whatever that you've played growing up, like was there any kind of consistent like mental barrier that you remember, or in training or whatever, um, that you remember like having to work through or anything like that?
Oh, definitely in football, it was catching the ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a reason I liked playing DB a little more than
Hmm.
receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, catching the ball was like I overthought that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of times where a play would kind of seamlessly happen and then the ball would be coming your way. And then all of a sudden, make sure you catch the ball, make sure you catch the ball. Don't drop the ball. You have to catch the ball. And it didn't have that natural
Mm-hmm.
sort of flow state or just like boom, boom, boom. The play happens without thinking. There was always a component where in practice, in games, in drills, I was always overthinking about catching the ball. And on the track side of things, that was definitely in the blocks or starting.
Mm.
Once I was up and going, you're in the race, you're good to go. But there was always, for me, a lot of like, man, I got to nail this start. I got to be perfect. I got to do this. I got to do that. As opposed to just like gun goes, run fast.
Mm-hmm.
Always overthinking the start. So those would be, at least for me when I was playing in those sports, those were the two things that, always I was overthinking. There was some sort of barrier that sometimes I felt like, oh, you're never going to be able to catch the ball that well, or never going to be able to exit the blocks
Mm.
that well. So those were definitely the examples that I would have dealt with, like myself when I was competing.
Yeah, I feel like that's pretty common. It's, I think, well, yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people in those situations, those would be the things. I think it's always whatever you feel like you're not. I think you said it perfectly there. Like, I'm never going to be able to do it that well. As soon as you have thoughts like that, then, it's like you always have to prove yourself every single time. And then there's all this pressure on that specific thing every single time,
And it could be different. Like the football example, there were people that I played with that never had to think twice about catching the ball. Just boom, it
Mm-hmm.
happened.
Mm-hmm.
But they maybe overthought, like maybe they were worried about their route running
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, which for me was just whatever. This is the route I'm running. Boom, good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Then as soon as the ball was in the air, different game
Mm-hmm.
at that standpoint. So it's going to be different for for every person based on their skill set, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's interesting. Yeah, for me in football and rugby as well, it was tackling was the weird one.
Just making sure you get the job done.
Yeah, because it was always like I played hockey when I was younger, and hockey's and I wasn't that good. I only played house league, so there was no body checking when I played. But like, so used to being upright the whole time, never really had to get low. And plus, I'm taller than a lot of people, especially back in high school. So used to being upright and tall, and then all of a sudden everyone's telling me to get low, and then no, lower than that, and lower than that,
You're like,
and
I can't go any lower.
yeah, I just was never like quick at getting down that way. And yeah, so like from the beginning of playing football, that was something that I wasn't good at, and then I think I just built up a lot of like anxiety around that as well. And fortunately I was pretty strong, so I could just kind of grab people, wrap them up, and fall down.
Take them with you.
It worked well enough in football and rugby. Like it's kind of weird, I think, maybe for a lot of people to think about. Like I played defensive line in university, and then having anxiety about making tackles, but yeah, it was a big thing. Like in grade 9, I was supposed to be starting defensive end, and then I missed a few tackles in the preseason scrimmage that we had, and then got benched, and then got moved to offense for the next 2 years until I earned my spot in grade 11. So yeah, it was interesting. In powerlifting specifically, I don't know if I had any anxiety around like a specific event. I think there was, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I ever really had any like big barriers for that. Just Like heavy stuff always feels heavy, and you're always a little bit nervous for that. I think I was always more nervous for high rep stuff, um, just because I think like I know it's gonna hurt. You know,
The pain is definitely going to be there.
yeah. Like I would much rather do like a maximal set of 2 or 3 than an easy set of 10. It might have been
All
different.
day,
It
all
might have
day.
been, yeah, it might have been different when I started lifting, but right now that's 100% the case. So,
Yeah, it's interesting that, well, like you said, for different people, like I definitely worked with athletes that are very uncomfortable with getting under a heavy bar.
mm,
Yeah, because like you mentioned, some, like for yourself, getting under a heavy bar is, you're like, okay, perfect, like let's go. I like lifting heavy, and I'm a little bit the same way. I'm not really nervous to get under a heavy bar and try to move a lot of weight, but yeah, there's always that like pause or deliberation where you're like, oh, this is 8 reps. I don't really know if I want to do this. Okay, let's let's get into it. Right is where for other people it could be the complete opposite. Like, oh, give me the 8 to 10 reps all day. But as soon as the weight is heavy or the bar is, you know, loaded a lot more than usual, then it's like, oh, okay, now I'm nervous or uncomfortable to get under the bar because I'm
mhm.
worried this might be too much weight for me.
Yeah. And I think that definitely for some people, it's like a fear about, I guess, I guess it's always, I think sometimes it's a fear of like hurting yourself. Um, I think maybe most of the time in like more experienced lifters and more experienced athletes, it's a fear of failure, you know, and failure could mean failing the rep, or if I guess failure just means not performing up to whatever standard,
Yeah, that you had for
you
yourself.
know. So if you're someone who is really good at heavy weights, then you might be really confident in your ability to do that. So no anxiety there, but you might be really not confident in your ability to do high volume stuff. So that could be that. Or, you know, maybe there's a lot of pressure. So you got to make this heavy set move really, really well because you're good at this. And it doesn't matter at all how your volume stuff goes as long as you finish it, you know?
Yeah, it's get to the finish line.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, have there been any like with like more beginner level athletes, or like you work with rookies on the team, first year athletes that probably don't have a lot of lifting experiences there? Do you notice different blocks for them, I guess, or different things that get in the way?
There's some, yeah, you see it sometimes with, like you mentioned, sometimes first year athletes, or I also see it a lot too with some of the high school athletes that I work with. If someone's never set foot in the weight room before, just the weight room environment in general can be intimidating for some people. So they're maybe not necessarily concerned with, you know, high rep stuff or heavy, because let's be honest, they don't really know any better. They don't know what it's like to lift heavy weight. They don't know what it's like to lift a lighter load to complete exhaustion. If they're new to the weight room, they've never experienced that stuff, so they don't have the history or the past to compare to go, oh man, lifting heavy is terrifying, or this is going to hurt if I go to 10 reps. They don't really have that experience to be nervous about. But sometimes the nerves are entering a space that is new for them for the first time, especially if you're on your own, right? Which I think one of the advantages with, you know, some of the university stuff is that an athlete will never have to set foot in the weight room for the first time on their own. They're always there with a coach or with somebody. Um, as where sometimes with the high school kids, their first experience before they lift with us might have been just going on their own to a gym by themselves. And so I think that's the biggest kind of block that I see with younger people or younger training age athletes that have never lifted before, in terms of what makes them a little nervous about lifting is it's not the actual things that we're doing in the weight room because they haven't experienced it yet to decide if they like it or if they don't like it, but just the intimidating presence of being in a weight room and seeing everybody doing stuff and feeling like you're the only one who doesn't know what they're doing and that you're kind of out of place. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see with younger athletes that have never set foot in the weight room is them usually being timid to be in the space in general.
Mm. Yeah, that's honestly not even something that I thought about when we were prepping for this episode.
Well, me neither. This came as a response, like with the question that you asked that I thought was good.
Fair enough. But yeah, like younger people, or I mean, I think women a lot of the time are intimidated to even go to the gym. I think, and depending on the gym environment, like the reputation of the gym or the attitude of the gym, then there's that sort of environment sets, like certain gyms are more welcoming or they appear more welcoming to beginners. I think most gyms are very accepting of beginners or at least most private gyms, I would say. Like if you're talking about like Good Life and, you know, LA Fitness and like all those
A
types of
public
ones.
chain gym.
Yeah, then I mean, like they are and they're not. Like they're not going to exclude you, but they're not going to help you either, really.
No, but it probably feels a lot different to walk into a Good Life than it does to walk into a West Side.
Oh, certainly.
Like that would be a
like that's
night and day.
intimidating. Where like everyone in there's like prepping for world records and things like that.
That's so right. That's I get what you're saying though. The environment that's created there is very important in terms of how somebody coming in is going to feel.
And but I do think that most gyms are willing or like excited to help you. As long as you show that you're excited and you want to be there and you want to learn and get better and stuff, like there's nothing wrong with not having experience, because until you have the experience, you're not going to have it. It's
You got to start somewhere.
You can't ever punish yourself for not knowing something that you don't know. But I think, it's always more about the attitude and like just the desire to get better is really the only thing. For me, a lot of the times, aside from that, I notice that with beginners always where, they're just nervous to get into the gym. But what I'll notice a lot of the times is like the scary positions in lifts. So, well, mostly it's the squat. The bottom of a squat is a scary position. And even with body weight or like super, super lightweights, there's a point where like you're strong until you get to like athletic position or a little bit below that. You're maybe strong at the bottom, but there's a point in the middle where you just have to trust your body and like
to go further.
Yeah. Like there's a point where, and you ask people about it and they're like, I mean, like maybe I can go lower, but honestly, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to come back up. And that's a really common thing. And I mean, you see that with beginners in the gym all the time, or like all those different like gym fail Instagrams and things like that, where people are just doing like quarter squats with 400 pounds, because they think the weight on the bar is the thing that's important, or what makes it look impressive. And I mean, honestly, when I started training in grade 11, like I was doing that kind of thing too, because I thought, that's what you're supposed to do.
Just lift heavy by any means necessary.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. And I mean, sinking into a deep squat with heavy weight is terrifying if you haven't done it before. So the other thing actually that I think is interesting, and it kind of goes back to not like knowing or not having the experience, not knowing what to expect. I noticed this when we were working with varsity. I'll just say varsity and not say which team specifically. That people that didn't have the experience lifting heavy would lift something. It's very easy for them, according to our experience, but they don't know that. They know that it feels heavy to them because they haven't lifted like that before.
Yeah.
And they're like, I can't do any more. It's really heavy. And I'm like, no, you can do more than that. You can add 30 pounds to that and it would still be easy.
They just don't know yet.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have any reference point.
Are there any particular strategies that you use with this? Obviously, again, with our limited, you know, scope of this, where we're not sports psychs, but there might be strategies that we have to use to, help somebody get through a sticking point or something like that. I wasn't sure if there's anything specifically that you use, or
I mean, it definitely depends on on the athlete and on the situation. Um, with the with that example, with the bottom of a squat for beginners, um, like backing off the weight significantly, so they're not afraid to get to the bottom. Or probably the biggest thing is changing the squat. So people will feel that way more often with a back squat, but like not at all with a goblet squat. Um, and a little bit more probably with a front squat, but less than a back squat. And I don't know why that is. I think it's probably something to do with being able to bail the weight easier. I think it's probably something to do with like being more upright. You can kind of just sit back and let the bar balance you, and you don't really need to like sink into your hips the same way you do with the back squat. So then that point where you have to trust your body is like less severe, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. It's always, I think, about just getting creative with making the situation a little bit more manageable. So those examples make that scary part of the squat a little bit more manageable. People that struggle on competition day, you got to probably make sure that their competition starts off on a really solid note, or at least whatever their more anxious lift or their more challenging lift, whatever that is, goes really, really well. And if that means you leave, 15 pounds in the tank, but everything flies and they go 3 for 3, that's great. If they, because of like starting off, if squats your lift and starting off with, going 1 for 3 on squats and like missing your PRs, that can quickly derail a competition. So yeah, some stuff like that. I don't know. It's very individual for sure.
yeah, that lines up a little bit with me. There's kind of two strategies that I'll try to use, and one of them is, trying to create an environment where failure is okay. Because I think if you take away the fear of failure from people, you can potentially avoid the situation like that you described when you played a preseason game, missed a couple of tackles, and then you were off defense for 2 years. Right? So then all of a sudden that can derail somebody for a little while and then feel like they have to, prove themselves or come back. So creating an environment, I think, where people are okay to fail, or that there's no shame in failing, will help. And then I think as coaches, if we have sound progressions and regressions, kind of as you've talked about, that helps as well. So I think if there's, a sticking point where someone's nervous about a particular exercise or doesn't like, a certain drill, or they feel like they're not capable of getting it, do you have a way to, regress the drill and then progress them back to make the drill simpler or easier, to build their confidence and to give them the the confidence that they need to execute the skill properly. So maybe you see they're struggling with, could be any movement or even sports skill, depending on what you're coaching. And then you think about, okay, is there a way that I can take this a few steps back, make it easier for the person? They start to have more success with whatever that could be. It could be a particular lift. It could be catching a ball. It could be making a tackle, whatever. Start scaling back that drill. And then as they get more confident, you can start to move things back up. And I think if, as a coach, if your drills or exercises, if you have really sound ways to progress and regress those drills, then you have a way that you can build confidence in the athletes in terms of what it is that they're trying to do. So
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot actually. The kind of just I mean I guess that's the stuff that I do. I just never thought about it in that kind of a simple way
well, as
where
soon as you were describing it, I was like, oh, those 2 points of what I do. I'm like, boom, that is the, having sound progressions, regressions. I feel like that's
Mhm.
exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, where on the one side you want to kind of whatever, like it's definitely that debunking that fear, whatever it is that they're afraid of and is leading to that block or that anxiety, then trying your best to get to the root of what that is. And I mean, ultimately it comes down to the person. They have to know within themselves that if it's failure, it's okay to fail. It's not a big deal. It doesn't reflect on me as an athlete or me as a person or whatever, you know. And obviously the coach can help a little bit, but ultimately they need to make that decision for themselves. And exposing them to that fear, I guess, can kind of help them realize that it's not as big of a deal as it feels like it is. And then, yeah, and then making things easier from a standpoint where you can build up that confidence. Um, yeah, so like in competitions, we'll make things easier for those lifts and if like other coaches say the same thing, like this person's a squatter, very mental lifter, they need to get off on a good start and their squats need to move really well, or else it'll, like if there's any risk of failure, it's not worth it because that could mess up his whole meet. um, and even in the gym, like people will, um, if people get really in their head about their technique on a lift, then it's time to scale back and just make it easy and just get them back to grooving consistently and get confident with that pattern.
Yeah, simplify the goal for them.
Mm-hmm.
Where now
Mm-hmm.
they're not having to think about 8 or 9 different things. Just do this one thing.
Yeah.
Do it well.
Yeah. Exactly. Um, Another thing that I think maybe is more specific to powerlifting that leads to mental barriers is like those round numbers or those milestone numbers. Like 2 plates, 3 plates, 4 plates, or like 200, 300, 400, 500, like those numbers. There's a lot of pressure on those numbers to be a part of this club or whatever. And so people,
Well, and
this was
even
one
coming
of,
from the football backgrounds of like the 1,000-pound club or something like that, where
mhm,
there's milestone numbers that
yeah,
you feel this almost like unconscious pressure to try to achieve.
well, unconscious and like, or
Or
completely conscious as well.
yeah,
When people, and you see it all the time on social media or like when people are testing or setting goals or whatever, they're like, okay, just, yeah, squatted 405. It was great. 500 is right around the corner. And like, well, no, it's not. That's going to
it's
take,
not. It's
that's a long
95
time,
pounds away.
but also just, I mean, take some time and celebrate what you just did. And like, I know you're going to be pumped for 495 or 500, but like, you're also going to be pumped for 425 and 430. And like,
Well, you
there's
should be,
so many numbers in between, like why is there
because it was
so much
better
more
than what you were
pressure?
doing before.
Exactly.
So you should be
And
happy and stoked about that.
yeah. And if people are, well, with goal setting, if people are, if maybe their PR is 365 for squats, something like that, and they're making a bunch of progress, they like realistically in the gym can actually squat 385. That's the time when they're like, I'm ready to try 400 because 400 is so important, and then that number just gets so in their head and they get focused on that. Maybe they get 385, but they didn't get 400, so they're upset. They feel like they let themselves down, you know, and they'll just keep trying that, and that's the number they have in their head. And I think that people get stuck on that number, and they don't take the 385 or the 390 or the 395, and like they just keep trying 400 when they're not ready to try it, and they get stuck there so much longer than they would otherwise, when if they didn't care and they took the 385, then the next time they tested, maybe it was 390. And then the next time they tested, maybe it's 410, like people get stuck on that. And then they're not thinking about 410, which would be cooler, or 415, which would be cooler than that. I don't know if that happens in sprinting at all, or if you deal with that in your weight room stuff, but
it's funny you bring that up. I mean, I think with varsity athletes, I can see the milestone numbers being more of a thing with strength athletes because the sport is fixated around those numbers. Haven't really dealt with that before with varsity athletes lifting, because I think if they're getting stronger, then they feel like they're accomplishing what they need to do in the weight room. But on the track, you definitely see that type of, like you said, that mental block or that pressure, where if the distance they're running equates to an event in competition. So somebody might not, if you told them to run a 220 or a 180, they wouldn't even think anything of it. They would just go ahead and do it. But if it's a 100 or a 200, and now they can associate the time they run with something directly in their competition, it creates, like you said, a little bit of that overthinking, like I need to make this run faster than what I'm capable of doing in competition because I need to be getting better. Which, yeah, you do need to be getting better, but now all of a sudden you've polluted some thoughts into their brain that instead of just going out and running fast and having a good rep, they're now overthinking things. So, and you could argue for whatever reason, if you were putting in a 100 or a 200, that they were going to run within the practice plan. If you made it 215 or 110, and it was just slightly different, so the time now that they get isn't associated with competition, so it takes a little less pressure off. I mean, are you really going to get any more or less out of training from that? Probably not, but you might in turn get a better rep out of them because they're not concerned about the time if they're running a 215 because they have no idea what they're actually capable of running 215 meters in terms of time. So they come back and it's the rep felt good or the rep felt bad for whatever reason. As where if you have them run a race distance, it's always going to come back to what was the time, and they're going to compare it back to what they think they should be getting based on competition. So I've seen a little bit of the same thing happen in track and field that you're describing there. And I think like you mentioned, trying to change the focus of it for people can usually be a good strategy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense for sure.
I tried that myself was it last summer when I was competing, and I wasn't giving myself like 100s and 200s in practice. I was doing like 175 or 230 or 130, something like that, where I have no history of what time am I capable of running over that distance, just to kind of take the pressure off. Or it's just, I just got to go out and run fast.
Yeah. You definitely see definitely the more specific it gets to the thing that matters, there's more pressure or anxiety around that. Where like people will put a lot more pressure on singles than they do on rep work. And the more reps they are, the less pressure's on it, unless it's like a rep range that you work in a lot and your rep PR in that range or your volume PR is in that range. Then there's a little bit of pressure, but it doesn't matter as much. And if you're doing singles, but it's a variation, then the weight doesn't matter.
It's still
really
different enough.
Yeah, exactly. But I think athletes, they put a lot of pressure on like, I need to be getting better all the time. And they're definitely always comparing their current self or sometimes their worst self to their best self, which was, their most ideal competition scenario. And it's hard, but you got to look at like the trend and you can't look at the individual day and things like that, so it's
tough to compare a day where you were trying to peak your best for competition versus a day where you're in the middle of a heavy training cycle, for example.
Exactly.
You're in a different spot physically and mentally.
Exactly. Um, the one actually I was wondering, the milestone numbers, like does the time, do people get caught up on like having goal times, when they like going into a competition or going into like a testing scenario where like I've run, 11:55 or something, this is the time I break 11:5 for sure.
Well, I mean, yeah, those sort of landmarks are there for everybody. I mean, if you ran 10:99 versus 11 seconds, it's a very small difference. But mentally, to say I broke into the 10-second barrier, that changes it for a lot of people, for example. So there are some of those same things. Or if somebody comes in with a PB of like whatever number low, so they ran, 17:2, and they're like, oh, it'd be great to run 16 something in a certain distance. Or, with jumping, oh, I'm 580 whatever, it'd be great to go over 6 meters. Or there is some of that where I feel like sometimes people get caught up with certain performances, or in this case, like standards, where if there's been a specified time or distance or performance mark that you need to qualify, then people get obsessive over that particular number, where it's like, I got to hit this time or this distance because I want to qualify, rather than just focusing on just go out there and do what you're capable of doing and let the number come to you rather than you chase after the number.
Yeah, that's definitely that kind of thing happens a little bit in powerlifting too, with like the standards. There was Wilks for a long time, which was like the body weight to weight lifted ratio.
So based on your body weight, there was always certain standards where you're like, I need to hit this number to get whatever Wilks score.
Yeah, and so like 440 was a number for a long time that was like, I think at one point it qualified you for like international competition. So people were like, if you got this number, you could apply to compete at the Arnold's or something like that. And yeah, like 400 was a number that meant if you have 400 Wilks, then you're a good lifter. No one's going to deny that you're a good lifter. And if you lift 500, you are great, and nobody lifts over 6, really.
Yeah, that's
but yeah, sometimes another thing that'll happen is like whatever the heaviest thing an athlete's doing on the day is the thing they're going to associate or put the most pressure on. So one thing that I've tried to do before is like, if the thing that I care about is a heavy set of 5 or whatever, and say that's going to be at 85%, something like that, then give the athlete a single. So it's 1 rep, which is closer to competition, and it's a little bit heavier, 88% maybe, but it's going to be a lot easier, and it's not going to like really take away that much from the thing that I care about. But once you do that, then now this is easy because there's not pressure on that anymore.
And you shifted the focus of the pressure a little bit too. You've almost like hidden it in there.
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, the athlete gets excited about doing singles. So, and then the singles feel easy, which builds confidence as well.
Yeah. No, that's definitely, something that you can do. Yeah. Don't put all the pressure on one thing. Like, hey, you better go out there and do this thing really well, because the whole workout hinges on it, or the whole training session is going to come down to that. Because then all of a sudden, they're going to be like, well, that was done poorly. My whole training session was a waste of time, which is not necessarily going to be true.
Yeah, I think people feel like that sometimes, though. Like, it was a bad day because this thing went not the way I expected it to.
Yeah, but like you said, that's a strategy that you can use to try to help shift the focus, or avoid that within the best of your ability as the coach to not have that happen. And I think that's where, like when I talked about trying to create an environment where failure is okay, it's obviously a fine line, because if people fail every single time, all the time, no one's going to have any confidence. But I think knowing that there's not going to be any like massive fallout. Like it's okay if you're not moving the heaviest weight that you possibly can on a day, or you're not running quite as fast as you should be able to. That's okay.
Yeah.
You know,
Like
there's
nothing.
days where sometimes we have to sharpen the axe, and then we can come back and chop down the tree
Hmm.
the next day.
Yeah.
And I think for myself too, it's, you know, being open and honest with the athletes in terms of the failure not being the end of the world, and using like myself as an example. Like there might be like, hey, you know what, we did this and that with the program. I messed that up. That's on me. Let's make this change. It's not that you're the only one who, that shows some humility
Hmm.
in some sense that, hey, we're in this together. I might make some mistakes. You might make some mistakes, but that's okay because we're going to learn from them and then better our practices moving forward. And I think sometimes as an athlete, if they hear the coach say, hey, no, sorry, that's on me. I made a mistake with that. Let's tweak this and try it differently. Then it can create an environment where the athlete goes, okay, this particular thing didn't go that well. It's okay for that to happen. Let me make this tweak and let me try to come back better. Right. So I think that's, like I said, I'm not a sports psych. So I'm trying to come up with strategies that sort of work within our scope or within our realm. And I think those are the two big things that I've had some success with in terms of creating an environment where the athletes know that failure once in a while doesn't come with a massive consequence, and being armed with progressions and regressions to help build confidence to overcome some of those mental barriers for people.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. There's been times where, athletes are saying like, I mean, let's just feel really bad right now, or like the last few weeks haven't been that good. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, I've noticed that. You know, this was kind of the last week where I was going to see like, is it just, you know, some extra stress from school or whatever, or is this thing that we're trying actually just not working? Either way, it's fine. We just learn from it and, like you say, make the change. And yeah, being open about that I think is helpful. And then yeah, I mean the athletes appreciate you being adaptable and things like that as well. um and yeah, and then letting them know that it's okay to fail, and like if you do, nothing bad happens. You know, you're not, all of a sudden you're not worse for it. It doesn't define you. It's temporary. You know, all these things. It's just one day. Look at all these amazing sessions you've had lately, and this one doesn't define you, kind of thing. Um, I do think there is a little bit of extra uh, pressure. This was the last area that I wanted to get into,
Yeah.
with athletes that have like an injury history or are coming off of an injury.
Oh
That
yeah, that's a whole nother, like
that there's
that's a tough one to get through.
yeah. Once you get like back into the range, like their old, you know, range of lifting, or like doing something similar to the thing that like hurt them if it was an instantaneous thing, you know, all those sorts of things. It's tough. And then I think people, like any little tweak or any little sensation just is terrifying, because I don't
Oh,
want to
people
go
are
back to where I
hypersensitive
was.
to it.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's a really good point to bring up, because that's maybe one of the toughest mental barriers to break through, is coming back from an injury.
hmm.
And I feel like that's a whole, at least in my, like that's a whole episode on its own.
Oh, definitely.
Like that's, but yeah, that's a great point to bring up, because that's a big one,
Hmm.
and everyone gets hurt at some point.
Yep.
Not to be a negative person, but everyone gets hurt at some. If you're playing sports and you're trying to compete at a high level, everyone gets hurt at some point.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, maybe we'll touch on that one, because we do want to talk about training or like injury rehab, coming back from injury at some point. So
Yeah, and I feel like that's definitely a topic that shows up. Like I
yeah.
said, if we start talking about, you know, overcoming the mental barriers of injury, we're going to be here for another
Yeah.
hour, I think.
Maybe we'll leave that one then.
But it's great that you brought that up, because it
Mhm.
100% is, you know, as a coach who works with people in the weight room or in training, probably the biggest barrier you're going to come up
Yeah,
against.
I would say so.
building confidence back from injury and things like
Mhm.
that. So yeah, definitely a great point to bring it up.
Yeah. So all I'll say on that is just take your time and be careful. But
Live to lift another day.
yeah, that's right. One thing that, well, I don't know if it's actually helped me combat mental barriers or anxieties or whatever, but maybe helps me forget about them is music. I know for myself,
That's the
getting
one
ready
place
for
where
like,
failure is not okay. You can
what do you
never
mean?
fail on the music choice. You
Oh,
always
I
got to
see.
have that set
I
up.
see. I
Yeah.
see. Yeah, I know like the song that I'm listening to when I'm getting ready for my third deadlift, and it's just like everything melts away as soon as you walk on the platform. So, yeah, that's another one. Big impact.
Yes.
Hmm.
It can help, or it could potentially lead you to do a lot of stupid stuff too. Like, oh yeah, I got this. And then
Yeah,
we've
that's
all
right.
been there.
Well, there's a reason that I don't listen to those songs before squat and bench. It's only
It's only a
deadlift.
deadlift.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
what did you have kicking around on the cassette player this week?
well, still listening to lots of podcasts, but I've been getting into electro swing has been fun to listen to.
Ooh.
So it's like a very 1920s vibe, but a lot of you can find some good playlists of like modern songs that have been adapted into that sound, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Um, and the other day when I was doing work, I was listening to Kanye West, which was also fun. I haven't listened to a lot of those songs in a long
Good
time.
old Kanye.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you?
Uh, kind of been on the synthwave train this week.
Okay.
So was listening to a band called Midnight Danger. Kind of got
Okay.
like a almost got a bit of like a horror element to some of their synthwave.
Mm,
Like it could be a backing track in some sort of like kind of creepy movie or something like that. So
mm,
it was good for kind of like leading up to Halloween. Like I had a bit of that spooky,
mm.
haunted element, at least the songs that I were listening to. So now I've just been listening to a lot. But yeah, there's a lot of marking and other stuff that I had to do. So anytime I have to do work, I'm usually hopping on the synthwave train.
Nice.
It's easier to work to. So that was kind of
Mhm.
the band that I was discovering this past
Nice.
week.
That's cool. So then once we get into December, it's going to have like a Christmas backing theme, huh?
Maybe, I don't know. I think this is more just by chance. And if I have to compare it to something, but that was we'll see what happens.
Yeah. You don't strike me as a Christmas music kind of guy.
Christmas music kind of sucks. I'm going to take flack for that. I know, but
Well, I'll share the flack because I agree 100%.
it's not that great.
I'm personally not even a big fan of Christmas movies, and I like movies in general. So
Yeah,
is
but
what it is. Christmas is nice.
we'll save that for Christmas time. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be about family and time off.
Yeah.
Not crappy music.
Yeah. There you go.
But we'll save that for opening lines in December, and then we can take flack from people then.
Nice.
I did have one thing I wanted to show you though,
Okay.
just before we go, because I lied to you
Oh, you have
about the tea.
tea.
I have one tea bag in that because I did say I have no tea in the house, and then it was like 2 days later I went and opened up the cupboards with the glasses, which I open maybe once every 3 weeks, and then I saw the tea bag sitting there, and I was like, oh, I forgot. I had guests come over, and then someone asked me what kind of tea I had, and I was like, I don't have any tea here. So like, okay, I'll bring my own, and they brought a few tea bags over, and there was one left over, and I had it in the cupboard.
Oh
So as
man.
soon as I opened the cupboard and I saw it, I was like, "Oh, I lied to Braden's face. I need to let him know that there's a tea bag. There was one singular tea bag in my house." So yeah, I felt like I owed that to you to let you know that I had lied to you. So yeah, I just wanted to let you know about the tea bag
Yeah.
and apologize in front of you or to you in front of the whole world, just because I felt a little bad about that.
Yeah, the whole world. That's crazy though that you have exactly one tea bag.
But it was enough to make me a liar.
Well, that's true.
So
That's true. I appreciate that. You are nothing if not a gentleman.
I
So,
appreciate that.
hmm
I do my best. I don't always succeed, but I do my best.
No, you do a good job. And at the end of the day, that's all you can do. It's okay to fail sometimes at being a gentleman.
That's right.
Yeah, at least in this arena.
That's right. Yeah. In the context
Mhm.
of this show, we accept the failure.
hmm hmm So yeah, good stuff. That was a good talk. I think I definitely learned some stuff and enjoyed that.
Yeah, me as well.
Mhm. And yeah, as always, audience, if you think there's anything that we need to know or talk about or whatever, just let us know on Instagram at Speed Strength Performance for Thomas, at Braden Southern for Braden Southern, and then Speed Strength Show for the show. And that was Speed Strength Show, the show. Thanks for coming along, world.
We will see you next time.
Peace.